Imagine the morning fog slowly lifting over the narrow streets of a medieval city. The first rays of sunlight pierce through the small windows of homes, illuminating stone walls and wooden beams that have withstood decades of rain and snow. This is a world where every nail, every plank, every stone tells a story of survival, skill, and humanity's adaptation to harsh living conditions. If you enjoy stories about the past, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. This helps us create even more content for those who want to fall asleep while learning fascinating details of our history. Urban labyrinths. Medieval cities were true labyrinths of narrow streets, where houses stood so close to each other that people on upper floors could reach across and shake hands through windows facing one another. Most urban homes were 2 or 3 stories tall, and the wealthiest burghers could even afford 4-story buildings. But this wasn't luxury as we think of it today. It was a necessity, a way to maximize every precious square meter of land within the city walls. Cities of that era were surrounded by massive stone or brick walls with towers and moats, serving as defenses against attacks. Because building these walls was so costly and land was limited, the city's area was compact and buildings were densely packed. Urban neighborhoods clustered around major centers, cathedrals, market squares, town halls, which became hubs of public life. Most urban homes were 2 or 3 stories tall, and the wealthiest burghers could afford 4-story buildings. However, having multiple floors was not a mark of luxury in the modern sense, but rather a way to use every square meter of valuable land as efficiently as possible. Land within the city walls was a limited resource, so homeowners tried to expand their living space upward without breaking building codes or narrowing the streets. Practical use of space. The ground floor was often used as a shop or workshop. This was practical and economical. The owner could work or sell goods without paying extra to rent a separate space. Large wooden shutters that opened outward created makeshift counters for displaying goods. The second floor was for receiving guests and family dinners. Here you'd find the main hall, the heart of the house, where the whole family gathered. This room had the largest windows, as far as the budget allowed, and the best furniture. The upper floors were for the homeowners and servants. Interestingly, bedrooms were small. People spent most of their time in the main hall, while the bedroom was used just for sleep and intimacy. Building materials and techniques. Houses were built mainly of wood, using the half-timbered technique, a wooden frame filled with stone, clay, or brick. With the rise of the Gothic style in the 13th, 15th centuries, stone buildings became more common, especially for public structures, cathedrals, town halls, and wealthier city homes. Windows were small and rare because glass was expensive and it was important to retain heat. Lighting came from candles, torches, or fireplaces. Streets were cramped and winding, creating a cozy atmosphere, but making access for carriages and carts difficult. Centers of craft and trade medieval cities were centers of craftsmanship, trade, and culture. The growth of the population, the development of wool production and other crafts, enriched merchants and artisans, which was reflected in their homes. These became taller and more decorated. Urban homes ceased to be isolated dwellings. They opened onto the street and became part of the public space. The first town halls, market rows, and public squares formed a new type of city life, where the home was not just a place to live, but also a center of economic and social activity. The modest majority. But not all city dwellers could afford multi-story homes with fireplaces. Most artisans and small merchants lived much more simply. Their interiors were Spartan. A bed made of planks with a mattress stuffed with feathers or straw, a wooden table, benches, and chests for storing belongings. Furniture was made from thick planks joined with wooden pegs. Unlike later eras, medieval furniture wasn't glued, making it easy to disassemble and transport. The chest was the main piece of furniture. It served as a wardrobe, trunk, seat, and, if needed, even a table. If city homes impressed with their height and complexity, rural houses were just the opposite. Simple, functional, and closely tied to the natural surroundings. Most country homes were single-story log structures with small windows. Structure and materials. The foundation of an urban home was usually a wooden frame, often made from oak due to its strength and durability. Walls were built using the half-timbered method, a wooden frame with vertical, horizontal, and diagonal elements, with spaces filled in with small stones or by using the wattle and daub technique. This method involved weaving flexible hazel or willow branches, then plastering them with a mixture of clay, chopped straw, and sometimes even manure. Wealthy townspeople used stone for foundations and ground floors. The most popular materials were ragstone, a coarse limestone from Kent, chalk, and flint. For prestigious buildings, imported stone was sometimes used, originally intended for royal projects. In contrast, peasant homes were mostly built of wood. In forested areas, oak, pine, or ash were common. The structure was simple but effective, a wooden frame filled with clay mixed with straw. Sometimes the wattle and daub method was used, woven branches plastered with clay. Walls were thick, providing good insulation. Interestingly, the color of a house often depended on the local soil. The clay gave a reddish tint, while limestone produced yellow or white hues. Thatched roofs. The roofs of rural homes were typically thatched, made from wheat, rye, or reeds. Thatch was not only cheap, but also very practical. When laid correctly, a thatched roof could last up to 50 years. Densely packed thatch provided excellent insulation, keeping houses warm in winter and cool in summer. However, thatched roofs had a serious drawback. They caught fire easily. One spark from a chimney could burn down the whole house in minutes. That's why some villages even passed laws banning thatch near castles and churches. Medieval townhouses, architectural and social phenomena. Medieval townhouses were more than just homes. They were architectural and social phenomena, reflecting the challenges of the era, limited space, and people's efforts to combine comfort with security and economic activity. Architectural features, overhanging floors, and urban density. A characteristic feature of medieval townhouses was that the second floor often jutted out above the first. This wasn't just an architectural quirk. It was a way for owners to increase living space without narrowing the already tight streets below. Every meter counted within the city walls. This solution was born out of necessity. Space inside city walls was extremely limited and expensive. Building codes forbade extending the ground floor past a certain line so as not to narrow the streets, but overhangs were allowed on upper floors. These jetties or cantilevered floors were built using special wooden beams extending past the first floor, supporting the wall and floor above. The beams, often massive and ornately carved, were both structural and decorative, sometimes featuring symbols, guild crests, or coats of arms. An overhang could reach 20-30 inches, 50-80 centimeters, and in some cases, even more than a meter, in houses with 3 or 4 stories. Each upper floor might project further, making the street above even narrower, creating a sense of coziness and protection. During rainy weather, the overhangs acted as natural awnings, shielding pedestrians and facades from the elements. Thanks to this planning, residents gained extra space for bedrooms, storage, or workshops without paying extra taxes for a larger plot of land. Overhanging floors also increased privacy. The windows were farther from street noise and dust, while offering a better view of what was happening below. Because of these features, medieval cities gained a special look. Narrow streets tapering toward the top, with houses seemingly embracing each other, giving the city a living, organic feel. At night, with windows aglow from candles, such streets looked even more magical. You can still see these quirky facades in old quarters of cities like London, York, Prague, Tallinn, or Lviv, where the second and sometimes third floor extends over the first, creating a kind of awning over the sidewalk. So, overhanging floors weren't just a style. They were a smart response to the challenges of medieval urban life. They symbolize people's drive for comfort even in the hardest conditions, and their ability to find practical solutions where there seemed to be no room left to maneuver. Planning a rural house. Unlike the multi-story urban homes with overhanging floors, most peasant houses up to the 13th century consisted of a single room, about 16 by 12 feet, 5 by 3.5 meters. Sometimes a second room was added later, but such homes were rare. Chests containing clothing and utensils stood the corners. These chests served not just for storage, but also as seats and tables. Furniture was scarce. Besides chests, there was usually a simple wooden table and benches. The floor was earthen, tamped down with ash and water to reduce dust. Though far from hygienic by today's standards, peasants tried to fight dirt and insects by scattering dried herbs or onion peels on the floor. Walls inside were rarely decorated. At best, they might be whitewashed with lime or painted with simple patterns. The main goal was functionality. The walls needed to keep out the cold and protect from wind and rain. A curious feature of rural homes was that animals were often kept indoors during winter. Cows, sheep, and pigs lived either in the same room as the people or in an attached shed. This was practical. The animals' body heat helped warm the house, and the owners could more easily care for livestock during harsh winters. Windows and lighting windows truly were a luxury. Glass was expensive and made in small round or diamond-shaped pieces, joined together with lead frames. Frosted or convex glass not only protected privacy, it was the only type most people could afford. Wealthier townspeople could afford colored glass or even simple stained glass with religious motifs. But most windows were covered with wooden shutters, oiled cloth, or thin plates of horn that let in light, but kept out wind and rain. Let's break it down. In the Middle Ages, windows didn't just let in daylight. They were the eyes of the house, connecting it to the world but also shielding it from the outside. Glass was made in small, round, or diamond-shaped pieces, joined by lead cames, creating a kind of mosaic. Because glass making was difficult and expensive, only the rich and churches could afford real glass windows. Most people covered their windows with wooden shutters, oiled cloth, or thin horn plates that let in some light but kept out drafts and rain. Frosted or convex glass provided both privacy and soft, diffused light, making interiors feel cozy and calm. For the wealthy, and especially for churches, colored glass became true art. Stained glass windows, which appeared in the 12th century, were made of colored glass pieces held together with lead. They depicted biblical stories, saints, and geometric patterns, filling interiors with vibrant color. Sunlight passing through these windows created a living symphony of color and light, filling the space with a sense of spirituality and beauty. The technique was described by the monk Theophilus, who explained how to make colored glass from river sand, potash, and metal oxides. Stained glass wasn't just decoration, it was a way to communicate religious messages to those who couldn't read. Windows in rural homes were very small. Glass was an unattainable luxury for peasants. Instead, they used oiled cloth, thin plates of horn, or simply wooden shutters. Main lighting in the dark hours came from splinters, tallow candles, or oil lamps, Candles were made of wax or tallow, splinters, thin strips of wood, burned with a bright but smoky flame. The fire in the fireplace or stove was not just a source of warmth, but the main light in the evenings. People tried to maximize daylight, organizing work and life around the available sunlight. Innovations in medieval architecture for lighting. Medieval architects developed techniques for better interior lighting, such as clear-story windows, tall windows on upper floors or in Gothic cathedrals, where they removed floor structures to let in more natural light and create a sense of space. These solutions were especially popular in aristocratic palaces and churches. Light in the Middle Ages wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It was a symbol of divine illumination, purity, and hope. It filtered through colored stained glass, filling dark stone halls with a glow that seemed to chase away the darkness of sin and ignorance. In homes, the gentle light of candles created an atmosphere of coziness, peace, and safety, so necessary after a long day. Light was a gift, warming and inspiring people. Even in the darkest times of the Middle Ages, it remained a symbol of life and hope, burning in people's hearts. Interior decor. The interior of a wealthy medieval city house was more than just a living space. It was a display of social status, taste, and cultural tradition. Decoration balanced practicality and beauty, creating an atmosphere of warmth, security, and comfort, as well as signaling prosperity. One of the most popular ways to decorate walls was with wooden paneling. These panels were not only decorative, but also provided extra insulation during the cold months. Often made from oak or ash, durable woods, they might feature carved linen fold patterns that imitated folded linen, adding a sense of texture and elegance. Master woodworkers covered the panels with complex designs, geometric shapes, or plant motifs in the Gothic style. Tapestries were another key element. These woven wall hangings were not only beautiful, but practical. They blocked drafts and helped retain heat. Tapestries often depicted biblical stories, scenes from knightly romances, or heroic and mythological tales. An important feature of tapestries was their portability. Wealthy merchants and nobles who traveled frequently took them along to create a sense of familiar comfort wherever they went. Thus, tapestries became symbols of identity and status. Grand halls and main rooms were often adorned with coats of arms, banners, weapons, and hunting trophies. These not only emphasized the family's status and origin, but also evoked a sense of strength and security. Shields with family crests were displayed on the walls, while weapons, swords, spears, axes served as both decoration and reminders of military prowess. Textiles in medieval homes were coarse but functional. Linen, wool, burlap, fur. Beds were draped with heavy curtains for warmth and privacy. Bedrooms featured woolen rugs and blankets, while people often sat on animal skins or furs spread on the floor in the great hall. Furniture was massive, made from wood, often carved. Chests served as wardrobes, tables, and seats. Tables and benches were simple but sturdy. In wealthier homes, they were sometimes inlaid. In rich homes, the fireplace was not only a source of heat, but also the centerpiece of the room, often decorated with sculptures, coats of arms, or carvings. The fireplace created a sense of comfort and was the main gathering spot for the family in the evening. By contrast, the peasant interior was far simpler and more functional. Unlike the wealthy townsfolk or feudal lords, peasants didn't have luxurious furniture or decorative textiles. Their homes contained only the essentials: a bed made from planks, topped with a mattress filled with feathers or weaving scraps, a wooden table, and benches. Chests in the corners stored clothing and household tools. The floor was usually dirt or covered with boards. In winter, it was sometimes strewn with straw, reeds, or even herbs and flowers like mint or verbena to freshen the air. Ceilings were unfinished, often just the underside of the upper floor without any decoration. Furniture was very basic, just a table, benches, and a few chests. In the best homes, there might be a small box for keepsakes or religious items like relics or holy water fonts. People sat on straw mats or on the bed, as chairs and benches were rare. Beds were wide but short, and families often slept together, parents and children sharing one bed or at least one room. The interior of a peasant's home was primarily functional, providing protection from cold and dampness and storage for belongings. Decorative elements were rare. If present, they might be simple embroidery or fabric, which could easily be packed up when moving. So, the peasant home reflected the harsh conditions of life. Survival, warmth, and simplicity were priorities, not luxury or aesthetics. Ceilings and walls were often left unfinished or painted in warm ochre, red, or yellow shades. Wealthier homes might feature frescoes with biblical or historical scenes, while simpler homes covered the walls with tapestries or cloth for extra warmth. Heating and fireplaces. Medieval homes were heated by fireplaces or stoves. Fireplaces, as we know them today, began to appear around the 11th to 12th centuries, mainly in northern Europe. Before that, the main source of heat was an open hearth in the center of the room, with smoke exiting through a hole in the roof or a vent. Such open hearths, common since prehistoric times, had a major drawback. Smoke filled the room, making it uncomfortable and hazardous. The first chimneys were simple wooden structures, but quickly switched to stone or brick for fire safety. Tall chimneys provided better draft and more effective smoke removal. The invention of the chimney was revolutionary. It allowed hearths to be placed near walls and led to the development of fireplaces with chimneys that could heat rooms more efficiently and reduce indoor smoke. However, fireplaces were expensive to build and initially only available to the wealthy, while poorer people continued to use traditional stoves or open hearths. The fireplace became not just a source of warmth, but also the center of family social life. Families gathered around it for meals, conversation, and handicrafts. It was a place where children listened to stories and adults discussed the day's events. Fire could be a luxury or a necessity, depending on who owned the home. In castles and large townhouses, fireplaces were true works of art. Huge stone structures taking up entire walls, with tall chimneys rising high above the roof line. They didn't just heat vast halls, but also served as the evening gathering spot for the household. Fireplaces were often decorated with carvings, coats of arms, or even paintings. A roaring fire banished the darkness, warmed cold stone walls, and filled the home with life. In simple peasant cottages, heating was more modest. The main source of warmth was the stove, a small structure made of clay or stone, fueled by wood. Its simple but effective design, a firebox for burning wood with channels to distribute heat, meant it served as both a heater and a kitchen range. The stove was also used for drying clothes, herbs, and vegetables. Above the stove was often a drying rack for food or wet clothes and shoes. During severe winters, families might even sleep on or near the stove to avoid freezing. On cold winter nights, the whole family gathered by the stove. Beds were placed nearby or even on top of the stove for warmth. Windows and doors were covered with hides or heavy cloth to retain heat. The fire in the stove was humble, but a reliable friend during tough times. Comparison with modern life. The evolution of comfort today, sitting in your apartment with central heating, electric lights, and spacious rooms, it's hard to imagine how different life was for our ancestors. Even the wealthiest medieval townsfolk didn't have the level of comfort found in an average modern apartment. Modern homes seem palatial compared to medieval standards. What we call a small apartment today would have seemed like a palace to someone from the Middle Ages. Medieval rooms were low-ceilinged, dark, and cramped. Even in wealthy homes, ceilings rarely exceeded 8 feet, 2.5 meters, and most of life took place in just 1 or 2 main rooms. The difference in lighting is striking. Today, we flip a switch for bright light. In the Middle Ages, houses were dim even during the day due to small windows and a lack of clear glass. At night, fireplaces, candles, or splinters provided the only light. Central heating feels natural to us, but it's a huge achievement of civilization. Medieval people had only 1 or 2 heat sources for an entire house. In winter, they wore many layers of clothing indoors, slept under heavy woolen blankets, and huddled near the fire. Modern amenities, plumbing, sewage, electricity, were completely unknown. Water was carried from a well or river, waste was tossed into the street, and fire had to be constantly maintained for light. Today, Every family member can have their own room. In the Middle Ages, this was a luxury for only the richest. Even wealthy merchants slept in the same room where they entertained guests and did business. But let's return to the days of knights and witch trials. Daily life in a medieval home. To better understand how these homes functioned, let's imagine a typical day for a medieval family. Morning. The day began with the first rays of sunlight. In cities, church bells announced the start of the day at 4 a.m. The mistress of the house would rekindle the fire in the hearth or stove if it had gone out overnight. This was a crucial task. Without fire, you couldn't cook or heat the house. In rural homes, the first thing was checking on the livestock, which often wintered indoors with the family. Then, women would start preparing food for the entire day. Medieval people usually ate 2 meals a day, and the main dish was prepared in the morning. Daytime, men went to work. In cities, to their workshop or shop on the first floor, in the countryside, to the fields. Women managed the household, cared for children, and cooked. Children helped adults from an early age, boys working with fathers, girls learning from mothers. Daylight was precious, so everyone tried to finish important tasks before sunset. Evening lighting was costly and dangerous because of the constant fire hazard. Evening. As darkness fell, life centered around the hearth or stove. Here dinner was made. Craftsmen finished small tasks. Women spun and sewed. Children listened to stories from their elders. Adults discussed the day's events. Winter evenings were long, so people went to bed early to save light and conserve warmth. The whole family often slept in one room, sometimes even in the same bed, to avoid freezing. Social hierarchy in housing. Medieval housing vividly reflected the social hierarchy of society. The difference between the house of a wealthy merchant and a peasant's hut was enormous. Aristocratic residences. The richest feudal lords lived in castles with keeps, massive towers serving as both residence and fortress. The keep was divided by floor. The ground floor stored supplies and weapons. The second was a grand hall for receptions, and upper floors were private quarters. Townhouses. Wealthy burghers tried to imitate the nobility in their multi-story houses. They decorated their homes with expensive fabrics, carved furniture, and coats of arms. The fireplace was a symbol of wealth and prestige. Craftsmen's homes. Small artisans lived more modestly, though still better than peasants. Their homes combined living and workspace. Workshop on the first floor. Living quarters above. Peasant huts. Peasants lived the simplest lives. Their homes were small, with minimal furniture and conveniences. Even among peasants, there were differences. Richer ones could afford larger homes and better furniture. Regional differences. Medieval housing varied significantly depending on region, climate, and available materials. Northern Europe. In northern areas with abundant forests, wooden houses dominated. Roofs were steep to shed snow easily. Great attention was paid to heating. Stoves and fireplaces were larger and more efficient. Southern Europe. In the Mediterranean, stone was used more often. Roofs were shallower and windows bigger. Less attention was given to heating. Protecting from the heat was more important. Mountain regions. In the mountains where trees were scarce, stone houses were common. Such homes were sturdier and more durable. Some stone peasant houses still stand today. Technological innovations. Over the course of the Middle Ages, living conditions gradually improved thanks to a series of technological innovations that significantly affected comfort and safety. Let's look at some of the most important. The invention of the chimney. One of the greatest innovations was the chimney. In the early Middle Ages, the hearth was placed in the center of the room, with smoke exiting through roof holes or wall cracks. This was unbearable. Smoke filled the room, irritated eyes, made breathing difficult, and increased the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Chimneys first appeared in the 12th century, initially in castles and wealthy homes. They were simple. Wooden or woven branches plastered with clay, venting smoke through the roof. By the 13th century, stone or brick chimneys became standard, more durable, and safer. For example, Chirk Castle in Wales has some of the oldest vertical chimneys built into thick walls, sloped at about 45 degrees for better draft. Chimneys not only improved indoor air quality, but also made fireplaces possible, becoming the heart of family life. The chimney is considered one of the most important medieval architectural innovations, transforming daily life and health. Advances in glassmaking, transparency, and light medieval glassmaking gradually improved, making glass windows more accessible and practical. Early glass was expensive, made in small round or diamond-shaped pieces held together by lead. These let in light but weren't fully transparent. Even in the 9th to 10th centuries, Vikings in Scandinavia had glass windows, showing the technology's early spread. In the 12th and 13th centuries, artisans created colored glass for stained glass windows in Gothic cathedrals, like Saint-Denis in France or Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. As glass-blowing techniques advanced, craftsmen began to make thinner, more transparent glass sheets, used not only in churches, but also in the homes of the wealthy. Transparent windows let in more light, improved comfort, and hygiene. Heating system improvements beyond chimneys, more complex heating systems appeared. Some castles and palaces had hypocaust systems, networks of channels inside thick stone walls that circulated warm air from basement furnaces. These evenly heated large spaces, especially in grand buildings. Tile stoves, Kachelofen, popular in Central Europe, were another innovation. Made of ceramic tiles, they retained heat long after the fire died. These stoves were both efficient and decorative, often featuring painted or relief surfaces. In the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin developed the Franklin stove, which greatly improved heating efficiency and reduced smoke loss. But that's another era. Problems of medieval life. Medieval life was full of hardships caused by limited technology, social inequality, and the absence of modern infrastructure. Here are some of the main challenges people faced, especially concerning water supply, sanitation, and pests. Water supply. In both medieval cities and villages, fresh water had to be carried by hand from wells, springs, or rivers. This was hard daily labor, usually done by women and children. In cities like Lviv or Paris, primitive water supply systems, wooden or stone pipes, were sometimes built to bring water from distant sources. But these were rare and only served a small portion of the population. Water was often contaminated by proximity to waste disposal sites, spreading disease. In villages, water from open sources could also be polluted. The lack of centralized water supply was a major cause of high mortality from infectious diseases. Sanitation. Sewer systems were either primitive or non-existent. Night soil was often dumped directly into the streets or open ditches running alongside them. These open drains were not carried far from homes, creating filthy and unsanitary conditions, especially in densely populated neighborhoods. This led to outbreaks of diseases such as plague, dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. Epidemics often spread due to contaminated water and contact with disease-carrying rats and insects. Pests. Rats, mice, lice, and other parasites were a constant problem in medieval towns and villages. Rats spread plague, lice caused itching, and transmitted disease. People tried to fight them with various folk remedies, scattering dried herbs, onion peels, or washing floors with vinegar and herbal infusions. Overcrowding and poor hygiene in cities made the problem especially acute. Diseases and epidemics. The lack of understanding about germs and hygiene meant frequent outbreaks of infectious disease. Plague, cholera, smallpox, typhoid, and dysentery claimed millions of lives. During epidemics, cities became deserted, and the fear of contagion paralyzed daily life. Fires, wooden houses with thatched roofs, and open flames posed a constant fire hazard. Narrow streets and dense building meant fire spread quickly. For example, the Great Fire of Lviv in 1527 destroyed almost the whole city. The Great Fire of London in 1666 burned down over 1,300 houses and 87 churches. To prevent fires, people were required to extinguish flames at night. During a fire, neighbors would often demolish houses to halt the blaze. Famine and food shortage, frequent crop failures, wars, and epidemics led to hunger and unrest. Peasants depended on their harvest, and bad weather could cause mass starvation. Lack of reserves and poor transport made food delivery to cities difficult. Lack of medical care, medicine relied on folk remedies, magic, and religious rituals. Without knowledge of infection and antiseptics, treatments were often ineffective or even dangerous. Surgery was performed without sterilization, and doctors sometimes used harmful substances like mercury. Living conditions and urban space, narrow, dark, dirty streets, a lack of nighttime lighting, damp, cold homes, all made for harsh living. Streets turned to mud during rains, and lack of paving meant puddles everywhere. Social consequences. All these problems led to high mortality, short life expectancy, and frequent social turmoil. At the same time, they spurred the development of laws, crafts, and technologies that gradually improved living conditions. In short, medieval life was a constant struggle with natural and social challenges, shaping the unique world view and culture of the era. Seasonal changes in housing. Medieval homes weren't just buildings. They were living organisms changing with the seasons to offer comfort during harsh winters and hot summers. Winter, the fight for warmth. When winter arrived, all efforts went into keeping the house warm, since cold could be deadly. Already small, expensive windows were further covered with cloth, hides, or wooden boards to keep out drafts. People wore warm clothing indoors, woolen shirts, cloaks, hoods, hats, and mittens. Many homes had only one room, so the whole family would gather near the stove or hearth for warmth. Fire was the center of life. Meals, work, and rest all happened around it. Interestingly, animals often lived indoors in winter, their body heat helping to warm the house. Cows, sheep, and pigs became living heaters, and their sounds and smells were just part of daily life. Floors were covered with straw, reeds, or even aromatic herbs and flowers to improve the air and combat the cold and bad smells. Beds were heavy, with thick blankets and pillows, and the family often slept together for shared warmth. Summer, seeking coolness and fresh air. In summer, people tried to keep houses cool. Thatched roofs, common in rural areas, were not only cheap, but great insulation against heat, keeping interiors cool. Windows were open for ventilation, though their number was limited for security and privacy. In cities, narrow streets and dense buildings created shade, lowering temperatures. People wore light linen or cotton clothing, spent more time outdoors or in gardens, and sought the natural coolness and shade of trees and flowers, adapting to the seasons. The art of survival. Medieval builders knew houses needed to be adaptable. Thick stone or wooden walls kept heat in during winter and cool air in during summer. Steep roofs let snow slide off and prevented water buildup. Monasteries and castles used extra insulation. Thick curtains on windows, floors covered with rugs or straw. Villages relied on local, effective natural materials. Modern people are often amazed by how anyone survived in such conditions. But the Middle Ages taught people to value the warmth of home, use natural resources wisely, and find simple, effective solutions for comfort. This story of seasonal adaptation is not just about the past. It's about how people survived by finding harmony with nature, even in the toughest circumstances. Hygiene and sanitation, living conditions in the Middle Ages were far from today's hygiene standards, causing serious health issues for residents. To really understand, let's separate myth from fact and look at how people approached cleanliness and sanitation. Personal hygiene, religion, fear, and poverty. In medieval Europe, several reasons limited regular personal care. First, religious beliefs often viewed frequent bathing as sinful indulgence, distracting from spiritual life. Second, many believed that clean skin was more susceptible to disease, so people actually avoided washing. Third, poverty and lack of access to clean water, bathhouses, or soap made regular bathing almost impossible for most. Bathing and public baths. While public bathhouses existed, they were used infrequently. During epidemics such as the plague, people stopped bathing altogether, believing water spread disease. In villages and towns, washing occurred rarely, maybe once a month, sometimes even less. For washing, people used urine, lye, or river water, which was hardly effective. Hair and skin care. Washing hair was also rare. Instead, people used dry cleansing methods, sprinkling hair with powders made from herbs, flour, or aromatic oils, and then combing it thoroughly. This helped mask odors and fight lice, but parasites remained common, especially among the poor. Skin was scrubbed with rough fabrics, and sometimes chicken manure or other folk remedies were used as antiseptics. Mercury was even used for skin conditions, which was very dangerous. Dental hygiene tooth care was primitive. People chewed sticks or rinsed their mouths with water, sometimes adding vinegar or sulfuric acid. Physicians believed that tooth worms caused toothaches and treated them by smoking teeth with candles or using other folk methods. Urban and rural sanitation. Without sewers and running water, waste was tossed into the street. Night pots were emptied from windows, creating filthy, stinking streets, especially in crowded areas. Medical knowledge was limited. Surgery was performed without sterilization, leading to infection and death. The importance of clean hands wasn't recognized until the mid-19th century. Social and cultural aspects, pale skin was considered noble, while tanned faces were associated with outdoor labor and lower classes. Women used lead-based powders or flour to lighten their faces, unaware of the dangers. We see that medieval hygiene was limited by a mix of religious beliefs, fear, poverty, and lack of technology. This led to the spread of disease and epidemics, though people did their best with the resources they had. hygiene practices improved gradually as medicine and technology advanced in later centuries. Housing as a reflection of worldview, medieval housing was much more than shelter. It reflected the deep cultural, religious, and social beliefs of the era. Every house, every element carried symbolic meaning about the worldview and way of life of its inhabitants. Religion, as the foundation religion, touched every aspect of life, and housing was no exception. Christian symbols, prayers, and images were common even in peasant homes. Icons, crosses, or other images protected the home and its residents from evil. In wealthy homes and castles, religious symbolism was even more prominent. Furniture was carved with images of saints, biblical scenes, angels. Ceilings and walls had biblical frescoes. Windows often had colored glass with religious themes. These elements not only decorated the house, but reminded inhabitants of moral values and their place in the world. Church architecture deeply influenced housing design. Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring spires and stained glass, symbolize the human yearning for the divine, and this symbolism appeared in the homes of the elite. Hierarchy and space. Medieval society was strictly hierarchical, and this was reflected in home layouts. In castles, the most important people, lords, knights, lived on the upper, safer, and more comfortable floors, while servants and guards were on the lower floors. City houses also had a clear hierarchy. The first floor was often for business or craft, the second for guests and family life, and the upper floors for bedrooms and private rooms. This organization reflected both social status and practical needs. Community and lack of privacy life was far less private than today. Families shared rooms. Guests often stayed in the home. Neighbors knew much about each other's lives. This reflected the communal nature of medieval society, where mutual aid and collectivity were necessary for survival. Cultural context and symbolism. Housing in the Middle Ages was much more than a physical structure. It was a key symbol reflecting social status, spiritual beliefs, and cultural values. Through architecture, decor, and spatial organization, people demonstrated their class, religious outlook, and worldview. Strict social hierarchy meant housing was a clear marker of status. Castles and palaces represented power and wealth, while simple peasant huts reflected modest circumstances. Religion shaped both the form and content of homes, with icons, crosses, and biblical scenes present everywhere. Housing also reflected regional traditions. Half-timbered houses in the north, stone homes with arches in the south. The way rooms were organized, who slept where the prayer corner was, how guests were received, demonstrated cultural norms and ways of life. Technological advances, such as chimneys, glass-making, and improved heating, reflected not only growing comfort, but also the spread of progress and openness to new ideas. Final reflections. Medieval housing was a mirror of its time, reflecting its religion, social structure, cultural traditions, and technological advances. Studying medieval homes lets us better understand people's mindset, values, and lifestyle, as well as their aspirations and fears. Through their architecture and interior design, we glimpse not just daily life, but the spirit of medieval society. In the end, medieval housing was not just protection from the elements. It was a microcosm, capturing every aspect of life. From simple peasant cottages to luxurious urban mansions, each house tells a story of survival, adaptation, and human ingenuity. Within these walls, generations were born and died, decisions were made, and traditions passed down. Today, when we set our thermostat or light up a room instantly, it's worth remembering those who built the foundation of our civilization under much harsher conditions. Their simplicity was wisdom, their modesty was dignity, and their endurance was the strength that brought humanity to today's comfort. Let this story help you appreciate the past and fall asleep reflecting on how far we've come from those distant days when every nail in the wall and every spark in the fireplace was the result of hard work and human perseverance. Good night, and may your dreams be as warm as a medieval stove on a cold winter's night.